Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, the region's longest-running public affairs program. Legislative Report is a weekly review of activity at the state capitol featuring lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota. Most importantly, it's an opportunity for viewers to call or email their legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, WDSE News and Public Affairs producer Greg Grell. Well, this is our final Legislative Report program of the 2013 legislative session, and with just over a week to go, there is still plenty of work to get done in St. Paul. The budget will take priority, and late today an announcement that spending targets have been agreed to by leadership in the House, Senate, and with Governor Dayton. This afternoon, you have an opportunity to ask lawmakers about issues coming up in the final days of the session. We have two phone numbers. Locally, dial 788-2844 with your questions. And if you're calling from outside Duluth, use our toll-free number, which is 1-877-307-8762. You can also send your question in an email to askmlr@wdse.org. And now let's introduce the lawmakers who are joining us for our final program in the studio, starting with Representative Mary Murphy, a Democrat from Hermantown. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Senator Roger Reinert, Democrat from Duluth. Welcome, Senator. And also here, Representative Erik Simonsin, a Democrat from Duluth. And let's start out with the big news of the day. It's kind of what everybody's been waiting for, because all of the finance bills, the budget, so to speak, for the state was waiting for these targets to be agreed to. So Representative Murphy, this is really a breakthrough at this point.
This is good because we can't answer any specific questions that a listener might have if they call in about particular money going to particular projects, or even committees. We don't know exactly how much money is in education, but we know that the target is covering what the House projected in the beginning of the year. They're general. The targets are the specific amounts that education, human services, state government, finance, transportation, public safety, commerce and jobs, what those agencies will have to spend on their programming. And that will be worked out in the next 3 days.
So Senator Reinert, as Representative Murphy says, now that those targets have been reached, that allows these bills to finally come together, and numbers will start to fill in all those line items.
Right. You know, in both the House and the Senate, the broad budget bills, the omnibus bills that people hear about, which are the broad bills covering the policy areas that Representative Murphy mentioned, other than transportation, have been out for quite a while. And conference committees have been meeting. They've already kind of gone through all the policy things and where there are differences that don't involve funds, but they've been waiting on these numbers. And as you said, as you opened this segment, these are brand new. I'm seeing them for the first time as I came in. I knew the governor and Senator Bach and Speaker Thiessen were having that press conference. So, but as Representative Murphy said as well, you know, we now have, I think, 8 days left, and with virtually everything done except knowing what these finals numbers are, those bills will come together pretty quickly.
So plugging in those numbers, will that be fairly routine, or will there be a lot of back and forth with people having kind of their favorite projects and so on?
Well, those certainly back and forth within the committees. You know, there was some give and take, just looking at these numbers briefly, some give and take between the House and the Senate on that. You know, and there are always differences. Even if the numbers were exactly the same, there are going to be differences in how funds are appropriated between the House and Senate. So the conference committees are very important groups of people that are negotiating the final details on these.
And Representative Simonsin, you serve on the tax committee, and there's talk in this news release that the governor and Senator Bach sent out that there is going to be some tax policy changes. What have you seen as you've sat through committee, and what do you think some of those changes might be, knowing that there's still some uncertainty right now?
Right, and I think the key is that there's still a lot of uncertainty. I mean, we have some very general, vague numbers here with targets and such, but we don't really know any of the details yet. And of course, within our tax bill and within the Senate tax bill, there are so many details that it's almost impossible to try to ascertain what's in there at this point. So I think the next couple of days will be key, but as has been mentioned here, you know, the next few days or the next week or so is going to be a lot of discussions about give and take and try to come up with a final product that's good for Minnesota. But we have these numbers now, and that's good because that gives us a week to get our work done.
Greg, You know, we should note just for viewers at home, because we're doing this in real time on Sunday.
Right. Live show on Sunday.
This information is available online. They can go to both the legislative website and the governor's website, see the press release, see the statement on the targets that have been released. But just as you were talking to Representative Simonsin, Representative Murphy and I are having a little side conversation because we're trying to get caught up on this. And the three things that really jump out at me: number one, on the tax bill side, the Senate had a tax bill of $1.8 billion. The House's was a bit larger than that, and we're looking at about $2 billion. So, and viewers may remember the Senate had a bit of a difficult time getting our tax bill off the floor. So it'll be interesting to see what the details are there. As for transportation, it says pending. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what that means. There's been some significant difference between the House and Senate on transportation financing. And then Representative Murphy very wisely caught an amount in capital investment, or what most folks know as bonding, of only $64 million, which means that there's probably not a significant bonding bill this year.
So that's one of the things that maybe fell apart in the negotiations, or didn't get enough in order to get the rest of this deal, the bonding bill. And this was a non-bonding year, correct? Typically it's every other year. Right.
But there was going to be money in, and it could possibly still be in, for higher ed, HEAPR, and there was supposed to be $109 million for the capital, and it says only 64, unless the $109 million is in the tax, as it was at one point last week. So we don't have details.
And Senator Reinert and Representative Simonsin, you both serve on the tax committee. I'll ask you, Senator Reinert, the same question I asked Representative Simonsin. In the news release, Senator Bach says they're going to make the tax system more fair and also better tax policy. What do you think some of that better tax policy might
I'm sure curious. We did a lot of work on the Senate side on tax policy, where we expanded the base and lowered the sales tax rate. It was not a net revenue increase for the state. It was a recognition that the sales tax has to be redone at some point. When it's only product-based, it becomes a weak system of revenue for the state, and we end up relying more heavily on the income tax and property tax. And then on the corporate side, we also did the same thing. We got rid of some corporate deductions, lowered that corporate tax rate. As I look at this, my guess is that part of what the Senate did is being accepted, but that it's not being used to lower the rate. So some of those deductions are being gotten rid of. That brings in more revenue. My guess would be that there's also the cigarette tax increase in here. To what amount, we don't know as we film this show, but that was something both the House and Senate had. And then I would assume, because it's been the governor's kind of signature item, the top 2% income tax increase.
And
that is in there.
Okay. And Representative Murphy, viewers at home might not be aware of some of the terminology. So we're talking about the targets for the finance bills. Tell people what the target means, and also, could it be that some of those targets end up, or less money is spent, or will they always spend up to that target amount?
Oh, we always spend up to that amount because we have to have a balanced budget. And this is the way the money is divided up, so that we can maintain a balanced budget, so that we can have pay off the school shifts, so that we can increase per pupil units in education, so we can do the things that Senator said, and still have a balanced budget, and we can give $400 million for significant property tax relief. And those were the goals, and those are what we're going to end up with by setting targets and dividing it among the various conference committees and telling them to arrive at the conclusion that we'll fall below the target or just at the target, so that our budget will be balanced, and then we will be constitutionally correct and say next year and for the 3 years after next year, we will be balanced.
So the budget is balanced out that far in advance. And of course there are, you never know what kind of tax revenue is going to come in, so there could be surpluses or deficits over those times, and sometimes the legislature has to come back and revisit that.
But we did get good news last week, or just in the days passing, I think it was Wednesday, that the income for April was $153 million, and that was more dollars above what they were expecting.
Senator Reinert?
Well, Greg, I was just going to say, to your point, as folks have thought about the state budget and had the conversations, it seems like the fact that we still have a budget deficit has become ancient memory. There is still almost a $700 hole that needs to be filled in the current biennium.
$700 million.
Right. So the first is, we talk about increases in revenue. The first $700 million goes straight to the budget deficit. We then also have a remaining K-12 shift from the state government shutdown in 2011, which the House has taken a very strong stand on repaying back that shift. So that brings us over $1 billion just to repay outstanding debts from a really, from frankly a fiscal mess that was left in 2011 and has lingered for 2 years. So, folks are out there watching right now, and certainly some are saying something to the effect of, you don't need new revenue. And I think that the response from legislators would be, we feel we have a priority obligation to put this fiscal house in order and have it in order, not just for months, but for at least 4 years.
And Representative Simonsin, I'll give you one last question on this issue, and then we'll move on to other issues. And if viewers have questions, we will try to answer them. But again, a lot of things are still up in the air. But this is your first year in the legislature. How does it feel now having these targets? It seems like a lot of work to get done in what's basically the last week of the session.
That's exactly right, because if as I look back since January 8th when we started this process, and the amount of work that's been done to get us up to this point, and now the amount of work that has to be done in the next week, it seems almost insurmountable. But clearly it's going to happen, and we're going to get it done. But I think it gives credit to the work that has been done up to this point, because now with the targets in place, the framework is laid so that we can just come together and we can work out these final differences and come together with a good product.
All right, well, it's going to be an exciting last week of the session, and there are going to be a lot of people watching closely to see what happens. Let's move on now. As you are watching Minnesota Legislative Report, don't forget to call in with your questions here. It's our final show of the session. Of course, the event that got a lot of attention this week in the Minnesota House was the vote to legalize same-sex marriage. Representative Murphy, that was a very emotional vote. All northern lawmakers voted yes on that vote. Talk a little bit about the marriage amendment vote and the situation on the floor, what it was like. I mean, there was a lot of people at the Capitol, all kinds of people on either side of the issue. It was a pretty important vote at the legislature.
All the votes at the legislature are important, but this was different in that there was so much citizen involvement in the issue. And we don't often have measured or assigned assignments in a debate. But we were told that if we wanted to talk, we had to make that known to leadership ahead of time. And after a certain person had talked, you could not sign up any longer. And so there was they wanted to limit the number of speeches, but they didn't want to set a number on it, and they wanted to tell people that they only had a certain amount of time to talk, but they didn't want to set the amount of time. And so it was kind of a self-sentencing effect that it turned out to be, because everyone that wanted to talk got to talk, everyone that spoke got to speak for as long as they wanted, but they used prudence and wisdom in what they were going to do and say. And if someone had already mentioned that the topic that they were going to talk about, they switched so they would not be repetitious. There was no repetition whatsoever in the debates, and it came from self-discipline rather than just stand up and ramble like some days we have. And so it was a very structured, it was very orderly, it was very respectful. And that is a decided contrast to the debate on the energy bill that had taken place a few days earlier, which I was shocked at the attitude on the floor and the attitude that was expressed in speeches by people that I had never expected it from, in that that debate was rude, and that debate was overstating and in some cases terrible exaggeration and innuendo that to me was totally unacceptable. But the debate on Thursday was very toned down and respectful, and I think most representatives feel that the outcome is something that they can live with.
And Representative Simonsin, agree with Representative Murphy. I did hear in several respects, the respectful nature of the conversation on the House floor, very respectful, and it seems like people kind of voted what their conscience was on this measure.
Yeah, you know, I think the key word here is respectful. I was very impressed by just the way the day played out. I thought everybody, you know, they had their position and they made their position known, the ones that could. But I was just very impressed by the fact that everybody was listening. And you don't often see that on the House floor because there's so many things that are going on and everybody's working and trying to get things done at the same time. But everybody was listening, everybody was paying attention. And I thought the debate was very good and healthy, and you know, clearly I'm happy with the outcome. But I was just so impressed by everybody's behavior. I thought it was well played.
Well, Senator Reinert, of course, the Senate is scheduled to take this issue up on Monday, I believe, at noon, and however long the debate will last before the vote. But it seems more or less a foregone conclusion that the Senate will vote in the affirmative.
I think so. The Senate has seemed to have the votes since early in the session. But, you know, I want to come back to a couple of the questions you were asking. You know, it was not a normal day at the Capitol, you know, for how strongly felt this issue is by many. And I've said to folks throughout the last 5 months, I have a strong personal feeling on this issue, but I'm really listening to everyone, because if this change is made, it's going to be a historic change, and it's going to be one that is just deeply felt by many, many people in different ways. You know, and from showing up at the Capitol and discovering my parking ramp was full of squad cars with a bomb truck outside, which was a bit sobering, to going inside and seeing the proponents and the opponents just side by side, all mixed, all throughout the Capitol. And, you know, the public was as respectful and civil as I think the House was, you know, and the two bodies kid each other. And, you know, we don't like to let the House be the standard, really, for the Senate, but the civility and the way the discourse was held really was. And, you know, to sort of highlight how it was not a normal day, most senators were watching the House discussion on our laptops on the floor as it was going on. And when they were ready to have a vote, the Senate almost didn't have a quorum, because so many senators went out the door to go and watch the House as they wrapped up and took a vote. So even as members, you know, we knew how special, how unique, how different this day was. And it just was, you know, this is a day I think all of us as members, regardless of where you were on the issue, are going to remember.
Well, Senator Reinert, as you were speaking, we did get a call. The caller is wondering, anonymous caller didn't leave his or her name, how will Senator Reinert be voting on the gay marriage bill?
Tune in on Monday.
All right, so you're not revealing your vote.
Well, I think I'm very passionate about being open to everyone who has an opinion on this. And I think if I'd started out January saying this is how I'm going to vote, it would have left half the people out of the discussion. So as I've said repeatedly, I have a very strong personal opinion on this issue, but I'm open to what everyone wants to communicate to me. And trust me, as we have a vote coming on Monday, that communication is alive and well over the weekend. So.
And Representative Murphy, I did see some comments that some legislators did make up their mind during the debate which way to vote. I believe Representative Loon, a Republican legislator, decided to vote yes after listening to the debate.
I believe many legislators had not declared their vote, and I think that people that regularly ask how representatives and senators are going to vote before a vote are not aware of the process completely, in the sense that they think we make up our minds long before the end. And that is wrong, because we continue to get information, as Senator said, we continue to get information that could be persuasive. And information that adds to our background on what we might personally have felt based on past experiences at the legislature, or how we voted years ago or 2 years ago or last year on an issue. And those issues change, and the information that we have changes. Sometimes the bill will go down, and then the next, the interim, the committee works and individuals that are proponents do a much better job of advocating for the need for the bill, and our minds get changed. And to ask us to have a vote, to ask us to declare votes before the information is complete is almost an incomplete action or a request to make. Because then if we do change our mind, then we're liars. You promised, or you said. And so it's not sometimes to ask us how we're going to vote before the vote is intimidating. It's an intimidating tactic. And very often, because we're not on the committees, or because we haven't received a lot of input from our districts, that's not the case on this issue. But very often, we have to use the floor debate as our chief reference to how we mold our decision and how it affects our district. And that floor debate, you know, I very often don't, I hardly ever bring my computer to the floor, because that's a distraction to me as floor debate goes on. And I am mostly in my place on the floor of the House of Representatives, because I have to listen to the debate to refresh myself on all the facts and figures on the issues. And it's the final discussion on the issue by the authors and by the anti-authors, the people that don't like it, that bring out the facts for one concluding time. And if we need that information before we press our green button or before we press our red button. And I respectfully ask the community that is ready for a decision before the vote comes up to give us that length of rope so that we can make a wise decision.
Representative Simonsin, I think a lot of members of the public might be surprised to hear Representative Murphy and Senator Reinert both say it. You know, I often don't make up my mind until the vote on the floor. What's your reaction to that?
Well, you know, for me personally, and again, this is just me personally, and everybody's got their own way that they do this, but there are certain things for me that are just fundamentally the way that I'm going to do something. And this is one issue that came up during the campaign for me a lot. So I just flat out answered it, and there was no chance that I was going to change my mind on that. But by and large, there are things that come up every day that you don't know, and Representative Murphy is absolutely right. There is so much information that comes at you at the very last minute, and if it's not something that you're working with consistently through committee or something, you oftentimes don't make up your mind until the last minute. And sometimes there are amendments that change the entire flavor of the bill. Which may in turn influence your vote one way or another. As an example, Representative Murphy talked about the energy bill. I think, quite frankly, I think that's the hardest vote I've taken this entire session, to be honest with you. Of all the things that we voted on, I think that might be the hardest one that I've struggled with, and still lose a little bit of sleep over it. But there are just certain things about certain bills that you're not always going to know ahead of time. But for me personally, there are just a few things that are just fundamental who I am. So,
all right, well, thank you. We're going to move on now to some other issues. You are watching Minnesota Legislative Report. It's our final show of the season, so call in with your questions right now. Senator Reinert, an anonymous caller from Duluth, is wondering, will the legislature be addressing
I think you shouldn't accept anonymous. We have to be here with our names and addresses out. You know,
it's kind of like this isn't a controversial question, by the way. So
yeah, no,
it's kind of like
I'm just saying and we'll get emails too where people won't identify themselves.
Yeah.
You know, I don't respond to those. You know, we have to be known. It's
sure.
fair for folks to have to be.
That's
known.
one of the big issues I have with the comment sections in the newspapers and so on.
Yep.
It's kind of like you can say anything and nobody knows who you are. This, though, is a question that many people might be interested in, wondering, will the legislature be addressing synthetic drugs in any upcoming bills?
Well, actually, I'll refer that one to Representative Simonsin, because he really tried to take the lead on making some more improvements in that this session. You know, with 8 days to go, I don't think so.
Nope.
But I think there is something that Erik's working on that
Right.
we'll try to make some more progress on next year.
And Representative Simonsin, I know that you were carrying a bill, but it hasn't progressed through the committee system. Is that correct?
Right. We introduced it too late. And quite frankly, we need to do some more work on this before we're ready to bring it. But in the next week, sometime during the next week, you will see Speaker Thiessen will announce the creation of a formal subcommittee within the House that I will be chairing, solely intended to deal with this synthetic drug issue. So we will be spending some time over the interim. We're going to have a hearing in Duluth. We're going to have a hearing in Reinert, where this is becoming more of an issue. But the key here is to educate legislators about the seriousness of the issue, because if you're not from Duluth or from an area where this is prevalent in your community, it really seems like not that big of a deal. First of all, people hear the word marijuana and they think it's just, you know, it's not that serious. And then you throw the word synthetic in front of it. That's kind of a little bit misleading. But those of us that live here, clearly we understand the magnitude of the problem. So our goal moving forward will be to come back in January with a bill that does two things. One, create some legislation that will be effective going forward. And two, we want to look and create an educational piece that we can use about the effects of these drugs. Similar to what's been done in the past with, you know, smoking and chewing tobacco and things like that. But so that'll be our focus over the interim, and I'm excited about that.
Senator Reinert?
I mean, your viewers tonight are getting all kinds of breaking real-time news.
Right.
That's great.
Right.
You know, one of the challenges we have had working on this issue has just been sort of coordinating all the available resources from federal to county to city to state, and how does each piece fit together to try and maximize the other instead of walking over the other. And you know, it has consistently been a moving target, not only because it's easy to change these synthetic drugs, but also because you have people that, in our case, have money and are interested in exercising their rights. I would note for the caller, who's obviously interested in the topic, that, you know, almost, if not daily, weekly, new resources are coming on board to try and address this issue. We just got a substantial report from the Attorney General, who the mayor and I had both said, please get engaged in this issue. You have some tools to use, outlining the areas that she can be involved. You know, we have some graduate students here in town from the College of Pharmacy that have decided to dig into this issue and find out where are these problems showing up in our emergency rooms, because right now they're not identified. People come in with cardiac arrest, people come in and need CAT scans, and the only telltale sign is they're in their mid-20s. And that raises a flag. So they're trying to track that data down. We've got, you know, some other folks who maybe will be doing some civil disobedience at our store downtown to try and make life a little bit difficult for that business as they've made it for others. So, you know, like I said, there's lots of energy, and this idea of a committee, especially with one of us chairing it, I think is phenomenal.
And Representative Simonsin, getting back to one of the difficulties of kind of keeping up with this is the fact that the formulas keep getting tweaked, and that's been an issue. But I understand a couple of states have figured out ways to try to deal with that.
Yeah, both Illinois and Indiana have come up with unique legislation, which is really what the bill that we introduced late in the session is modeled after. So we want to continue down that path, and then I'm also working with both of those states in terms of following and tracking what their legislation is doing. But quite honestly, it seems to be very effective, and we just want to make sure that we tailor it to our needs. But the key is getting everybody on board, from the legislative side to the prosecuting side to the law enforcement side to the medical community side, as well as just the general community. So it's going to be a lot of work, but I think we can come up with something that will be effective.
Well, and following it from my side, there are a lot of different entities involved in trying to do something about this, so we'll keep watching to see what happens. We've got a call from Susan in Beauvais, and it's a question about transportation. And so, Senator Reinert, I'll give it to you first, but Representative Simonsin, you also are on transportation. And Susan is wondering, why has the legislature chosen to override MnDOT in the Corps of Engineers regarding Highway 169 and 53 rerouting in the Transportation Finance Bill? Is that true? I know that there's still no definitive answer as to where they're going to reroute the highway by Virginia. So,
well, I'm not aware of anything, and I sit on transportation in the Senate dealing with Highway 169. The issue with Highway 53, and probably most viewers know this, is that around Virginia, it's actually running atop mine land, and the mines now want access to that land. And back in the 60s, the state gave the mines an easement and said, if you should ever need this, we'll move the road. Probably not the best decision in the 60s, but there it is. And there are three different options. There's one option that is locally pretty strongly opposed, and at least on the Senate side, and I can't speak to the House, Senator Thomasoni, every opportunity he's had, he's kind of taken that option off the table. So in the Senate bill, that is, there are three options. One of them in the Senate bill says you can't pursue this, but I'm not familiar at all with anything on the Senate bill dealing with 169.
And 169 may simply be that it does meet 53 there, and there may be something that needs to be 69 coming in on the one side. Representative Simonsin, what about on the House side? Is there anything to talk about as far as the rerouting of 53 at this point?
Well, I think it kind of patterns itself off to what Senator Reinert was talking about, because I know Representative Metsa introduced a bill recently. I think we talked about this, that essentially narrows down the scope of what the options are based on what the community wants. So hopefully going forward, it's a good balance of what works for the community as well as meets the needs of the mine.
Okay. We've got a call from Karen in Duluth, and this is regarding property tax. She's wondering, is the property tax homestead credit going to be reinstated? And that may be one of the issues that was dealt with this weekend in the target. Senator Reinert, did you get the impression?
It may be.
We don't know yet.
We don't know the details. We did in the Senate bill, and I think the House did in their bill as well. The other thing that directly relates to property tax is local government aid. You know that, and I go back to 2008, and that was the primary reason I ran. You know, I was president of the council, and we kept coming up at the end of the year having local government aid pulled out from under us with only one place to go, raising the property tax. So both the Senate and the House bills also had an $80 million increase in local government aid. In the Senate, I wrote that bill that also revised the formula and made it more transparent. So both of those factors, if they are a part of this, and just looking at kind of the broad numbers, I think they are, will have direct impacts on property taxes. Now, having said that, it's going to be up to individuals in various communities to then hold their mayors and city councils accountable. And if they've added, you know, special fees and things over the last decade when state aid was hard to come by, might be time to look at unrolling some of those. But that's going to have to be, the state's going to do its part. Local folks are going to have to do their part by, you know, asking for transparency and accountability from their local units of government.
And just for people that may not be aware, the state actually doesn't set property taxes because that's set by the local bodies of government. The governor's news release released this afternoon does say that there's $400 million in property tax relief. Doesn't say whether that's the homestead credit being reinstated or in some other form. So, Representative Murphy, Gary from ESCO is wondering about the ESCO Industrial Park. He says, and this wasn't your district, I don't know if it is anymore now because your district has changed. But he says it was funded several years ago and is still vacant. Do you still support it, and is it a good investment? Gary is wondering.
The money that was funded came from Carleton County Economic Development Fund, and I know that because I did represent ESCO for 36 years. And I think it was a good investment, and you'll find that it may be still empty for a few years, but it is going to be something that the community will receive benefit from down the road. I do not serve the ESCO community any longer, but they are still in my heart.
We have a call, and we've had several references to the energy bill in the debate, and we had a call from Holly in Duluth, and I believe this is what you were referring to. Holly is wondering, what are your feelings on the solar mandate, and how will that mandate affect my utilities rate? And I believe that was some of the debate, Representative Murphy, Representative Simonsin. We'll let you start, Representative Simonsin, about she's wondering, what are your feelings on the solar mandate? And then maybe get into a little bit more about that debate on the House floor.
this is the piece that caused me great angst over the last week, to be honest with you. And I don't sit on the Energy Committee, so I haven't been involved in these discussions all along. But generally, by and large, I believe in renewable energy, and I understand the shift towards moving towards additional solar, and I think it's a good idea as we plan for the future that we move into. Or we move away from things that are, possibly damaging our environment. But with this particular issue and that bill, and there was some amendments that were added as we debated the bill. But essentially, the solar mandate, I think, is 40% by 2030. But the problem is, or the good thing is, depending on how you look at it, we've carved out the municipals and the co-ops, as well as a good portion of Minnesota Power's. In fact, the majority of their customers have been carved out of this equation, which I understand the reason behind that, because essentially they're running on a very thin line as it is, and if we increase their energy costs, which they're major users of energy, paper mills and mines is what I'm talking about, it's going to have a negative effect on them. But to me, if we're going to have a solar mandate, we need to have a solar mandate. Let's do a solar mandate across the board, across the state. Maybe it's something less, but I personally believe that it should be applicable to all, because we now, if this passes and becomes law, and we don't know if it will yet or not, but if it does, we here in the city of Duluth as residents and business owners, we're going to be part of this equation. We're going to be part of this solution, which is a good solution to be a part of. I'm just wondering about the balance, and that's where I really had a really hard time with that. So, but nonetheless, we did pass it, and I do now sit on the Energy Conference Committee of all things. So be careful what you ask for.
You're going to learn a lot more about it in the coming week.
Yeah.
Senator Reinert, has the Senate dealt with the energy bill yet?
Yes, we had it on Thursday.
Is that solar in there?
It is at a much lower level than what the House had it as. But I'm glad to know a member of the conference committee, because I actually voted no on the bill, and for many of the reasons that Erik highlighted. I was very concerned from the start of session about the concept of the solar mandate. I was much more comfortable with an increase in the renewable energy level.
And solar could be part of that.
And solar could be part of it, but we know here in the Northland that water is a big part, biomass is a part, wind is a part. We have all of those components. Why would we say to the state that only one is the option you can use? Our state is very diverse. If you look and take the state map and look at, from forest to prairie and water resources, we have a great variance. And let's encourage people to use what is most local to them and therefore most sustainable. So that caused me concern all the way through the process. I was hoping that mandate wouldn't be in there at all. And then when it came to the floor, what Erik pointed out was this case in the Senate bill as well, exempting municipal power generators, exempting co-op power generators, exempting major users. Well, gee, by the time you're done, who's left? And if this is good, the fact that you are making all these exemptions means you're recognizing that it's a concern. And if it's a concern for some, it's a concern for all. And you either need to be willing to say this is the direction we want to go and everybody's going, or there are concerns and maybe we should look at a different option. So I am genuinely interested in what happens in that conference committee, because there are some items of concern there.
And Representative Murphy, one other part of that was the provision that says that you need to buy your solar panels from Minnesota. There's a manufacturer on the range. And was that part of the controversy on the House?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Everything was part of the controversy in the House. But the bottom line was that if it was ever going to get discussed between the House and the Senate, we had to pass it off the House floor. And so whether we loved it or just, okay, we'll vote for it kind of thing, we did get it off the House floor, and it is in conference committee. And it's possible, it has happened in the past, that conference committees have met over the summer and into the fall and into the next year.
Oh, wonderful.
So,
and put something together that would be
put
passed
something
in the upcoming
together
session.
that allows all people with wisdom and knowledge to come together. And I don't know if that's what's going to happen or if we're going to have a result next week, but whatever, Representative Simonsin will serve us well, and I'm glad.
Well, and this is this is where we have a wonderful asset in Representative Murphy, who has experience in the legislative process that far exceeds ours, because the Energy Committee does not have a target. It's not a part of the budget that must be done this year. So she's absolutely right. That committee could continue to meet and work on policy. I'll text Erik over the summer while he's down at the Capitol, and we're up here doing tall ships and Grandma's Marathon.
No, maybe the conference committee would be meeting up here.
That's a great idea.
All
Up
right.
where the real energy is.
He's not laughing.
Somehow I don't think that's the case.
We'll move on to some other issues here. You are watching Minnesota Legislative Report. We've got about 15 minutes left. Conference Committee was charged this week with smoothing the differences between each body's omnibus education bill. That began on Thursday. I don't know if we have anybody here on that Conference Committee, but maybe one of you could address the education bill as it stands right now and what we're looking at. Everybody's interested in education. Representative Murphy?
The education bill is as it stood when it came out of House and when it came out of the Senate. I think they did have a meeting or two, but very little was decided pending what the targets were.
So this week we'll learn more about education funding K through 12.
They are ready and eager to go to work now that they know their numbers. And I bet they're heading for the Capitol right at this moment.
Which I think is accurate for virtually every conference committee. They have been meeting in most cases for a couple weeks and are really just queued up, waiting for what their number is, and they can kind of put the last touches on. So, as we said, starting, we only have 8 days left, and new members of the legislature will find out you don't get a lot of sleep in those last 8 days, but it shouldn't take a lot of time for some of these big areas to button their bills up and get them back to each body's floor. At which point it's important for folks to know at home they can't be amended anymore. When they come back to the House and Senate from Conference Committee, it's a yes or no.
A straight up or down vote.
Exactly.
And that also is a reason why we don't have Minnesota Legislative Report the final Sunday of the session.
Right, yeah.
Because we work.
You guys will all be down at the Capitol, and we understand that. Senator Reinert, before we move on this issue, the one thing that you mentioned earlier, though, is part of what might happen with education is to pay off the shift.
Right.
Explain what that's all about.
Right. Well, in 2011, the way that the state ended the government shutdown and buttoned up a several billion-dollar hole in the budget was via a couple different things. One was shifting funds from our K-12 schools. So the state typically, within a fiscal year, has a per pupil amount that it pays to every school district in the state based on the number of pupils it has. Routinely, 10% is held back to account for enrollment shifts that carry over from one year to the next. Students that move within a school year, that sort of thing, and then that 10% is settled up at the next year with the next year's appropriation. And both sides, Democrats and Republicans in the past, have changed that ratio from 90-10 to something that was a little bit more favorable to the state and a little bit more onerous to the school districts. But in the case of 2011, it went from 90-10 to almost a third of the funding being withheld. And what we saw across the state, Duluth, ISD 709 included, was school districts having to borrow money in the current fiscal year just to make payroll, because so much of their funding, 30 cents, 33 cents of every dollar was not coming that they had expected. So we were able to repay a good portion of that based on improving forecasts in the state over the last year and a half. And that's now down to roughly about 20. It's about an 80-20 split, slightly under the 20. The Senate's position on that has been that as the forecast continues to improve, we ought to be able to get that completely filled over the next calendar year. The House has taken a much stronger position in terms of wanting to get that repaid as part of this budget deal.
All right. Representative Simonsin, one of the big issues coming into the session was gun control legislation. Is there going to be any gun control legislation? Will there be a vote this session?
Doesn't appear that there will be a vote this session. Doesn't mean that the issue is resolved by any means, but it does not appear that the Speaker essentially has said that we will not have a vote in the House this session.
So Senator Reinert, that's kind of stalled gun control legislation. It's not moving on in either house?
Nope, it's not moving in the Senate either. Once the Speaker made that announcement, I think Senator Bach almost immediately said, you know, we're not going to take it up if the House isn't going to take it up.
Do you imagine that something may come forward in the second year of the session?
Well, I think, and you know, the other members can comment on this too. You know, there were a lot of different things on the table, but there were a number of things that seemed to have a lot of support, and one was around a better background check process. You know, we use the word universal and people get a little spun up, but there are definitely ways we can improve the background check. Another one was certainly around increasing funding for mental health, which has been on the decline in Minnesota. We've not done a good job with mental health over the last decade. And then another area was these straw man purchases. So if I'm not supposed to have a firearm because I'm a felon or whatever the case might be, and I have you buy it for me and you know that I'm not supposed to have one, right now you have no culpability. You've done nothing wrong in the state of Minnesota, and that, you know, law enforcement would say that that's a major loophole. So there were some common sense areas. I think we could have made some progress, but as the public probably is not surprised, anything was strongly opposed by many.
All right, moving on to another issue. Representative Murphy, this week the House passed the Omnibus Legacy Bill, which appropriates money from the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. Can you tell us a little bit about the bill? Maybe the targets are set now?
Let's see. Oh, no target.
But that money comes from a tax that was voted
right.
for by the people of the state. So
Good reminder. The bill was very much like it was before when it came out of the Legacy Committee, and it stayed the way it was on the floor. And so it's ready to go to conference, and I expect that they will be able to work out the differences by the end of the week.
And Senator Reinert, what about on the Senate side?
The Senate's passed its legacy bill as well. They're both in conference committee. I don't serve on that one, so I'm not as up on the details on that as perhaps others are. But I know we have the Duluth Children's Museum has a proposal, the Great Lakes Aquarium has a proposal, the zoo has a proposal, all of which.
And flood control.
For Duluth?
There's some money in it in the House bill for the rivers of Duluth in that to shore them up, or to shore the banks up and create enhancements to the damage that was taking place. But also, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I forgot to mention that the outdoor heritage recommendations are all the outdoor heritage Lessard-Sam recommendations are all contained in the House bill as they were proposed. Now there are a couple other additions,
okay, but
as the outdoor heritage proposed their projects, they are all in the bill.
And Senator Reinert, you had some.
Well, I was just going to two things. One is, of course, we have one of the architects
right.
here with us, and Representative Murphy. I recall well as a House member her giving us, I think, sage advice to not rush into spending these dollars until there was a good process set up for how these proposals were going to be vetted. And at that time, of course, as a House member, I thought the Senate was ridiculous in its idea that it wasn't going to do that. You know, now I have to take a little bit different position. But I was also going to say, if we have time today, we should talk a little bit about flood recovery, because there have been some things during this session that Representative Simonsin and I have worked on that we think are going to make life a little bit easier for some folks.
Well, let's do that right now. We have a little over 5 minutes, and I have a couple other issues. So Representative Simonsin, do you want to address some of the flood recovery issues?
Right. There's probably a couple different things, and we have spent some time working on some of the Housing Finance Agency dollars and trying to figure out a way to make it a little bit easier to access some of those funds. So I think, and I'm hopeful, that what will come out of this session will be an easier process for folks to access some of those dollars, because we've kind of exhausted the initial process that was put into place. So we hope that some of those dollars will be shifted into an area where there'll be easier access for folks to get to. But the other piece that is still somewhat out there undecided is there's still some significant dollars that are left, and I can't remember the name of the fund that it's in, but part of the proposal in one of the bills was to carve out those dollars and spend them.
In a House bill.
In a House bill, right. And we've made our concerns known about that, so I'm hopeful that the end result will be that those dollars were set aside for a reason, and there's still need out in our community, as well as our community, you know, downstream throughout the state. So we want to make sure that those dollars are easier to access and still available.
And I would just quickly follow up, and particularly on the housing rehab funds, you know, what folks needed to do was apply to the SBA. And if they were
Small Business Administration.
Right, and if they were approved, then they had a low interest loan through the federal government. And if they were denied, then they could go to the state's MHFA Quick Start program, which was a forgivable loan over 10 years. You know, and what we've seen is people underutilizing those dollars. Now, all of us anecdotally have different reasons, have heard different reasons for why that is. But what we have done is said, you know, we put money into the bill last summer, the special session flood recovery bill, to fix homes. So if it's not being used, what do we need to do to use it? And so what the MHFA commissioner had a meeting with Erik and I that went really well, and what she agreed to do was to take it out of this Quick Start program, put it in a different housing rental or housing rehab program they have, so that folks didn't have to go through the feds first and get denied in order to access this state money. So once these bills are signed, and then probably 30 days after that, we should have that change at MHFA and a much easier time for northeastern Minnesotans to access those housing rehab dollars.
All right, we have about less than 5 minutes left. I'm going to try to get to a couple of quick questions. Gary from Cloquet is wondering about American Indian gaming. We get a question or two about American Indian gaming pretty much every year. He's wondering, why is it unconstitutional to allow the expansion of non-Indian gaming, and is it possible to amend this so that everyone can enjoy equal gaming rights?
I'll take a first stab, only because I have a friend who's doing graduate work at UMD on Native American Indian tribes and gaming, so she gave me a lecture a couple of weeks ago. Thanks, Caroline. And you know, each state, as gaming proceeded, developed their own compact, and those compacts vary from state to state. But once the compact was set under authority from the federal government, they're not changeable. And in the case of Minnesota, it gave us the structure that we have now. Now, our compact does not preclude the state doing its own gaming option, and so that comes up periodically. Why that doesn't happen is more political than process, but you know, the way that native gaming in Minnesota is constructed is a part of that compact and is not going to change. Where there is potential change is whether the state would run something or not.
All right, that's a good explanation. Mark from Hibbing is wondering, we talked about this last week, Representative Murphy, on the police firefighters teacher pension bailout. Why don't the Duluth teachers fix the funds themselves instead of asking for a bailout? Because they don't have the money.
And because of the changing demographics, in the fact that there are fewer students and there are fewer active teachers, and because the people that are receiving the pensions are living longer.
All right, we've got 3 minutes left. This week, the House passed a bill that would create a water commission that would make recommendations to the legislature regarding water issues. Representative Murphy, would you like to talk about that? What's the Water Commission all about?
The House of Representatives passed a bill which would establish a water commission, reestablish a water commission that was in effect. There are something like 82 different governing bodies of on water in the state, and PCA is one of them, DNR is another, and Great Lakes is another, and there's numerous places, and no one area. So very often a bill gets passed that relates to how PCA is doing their water monitoring, or how DNR is doing their water monitoring. If we had a water commission, perhaps the commission would recommend legislation that would be more effective than individual bills pertaining to one entity or another, but rather all entities. And that is the hope and the desire so that we could get better bills introduced even that has consensus behind them, so we don't have to have so many individual internal little fights about water and piecemeal water plans rather than a general water plan. That's the idea. Whether it passes and whether it has an accompanying bill in the Senate, I don't know.
Do you know Senator Reinert, or have you seen it?
I don't believe so. I don't recall it as a floor discussion item. It may still be coming, but
Right. And sometimes a bill like that, if the House passes the next year, maybe the Senate could deal with it, and then eventually that commission can be set up. We have 1 minute left, and so we're going to just have one real quick question for Representative Simonsin. We talked a little bit about transportation earlier. Now we have a target for transportation. Is there any projects in our region that we could expect?
You have a pending target
Exactly.
for transportation.
That's right, it's pending, so that means we don't know.
We do not know the details, but we do know that there's a need for transportation funding statewide, both Metro and Greater Minnesota. So I hope that something comes out of that that's going to invest some dollars in transportation.
you know, the Senate sent the House a bill that included a 2.5-cent gas tax increase over the next 2 years, and then 2.5 cents the 2 years after that. The Senate's hope is that the House will just take our bill and agree to put some revenue into our infrastructure.
All right, well, a lot
That's
is going to happen.
pending.
That's right, it's all pending. A lot is going to happen this week. I really want to thank you for a great conversation today, Representative Murphy, Senator Reinert,
Thanks for
Representative Simonsin. Thank you very much for being here. That's going to do it for Minnesota Legislative Report this session. Thanks to the lawmakers who have joined us in the studio throughout the session, and to everyone who called with the question. And thanks to the crew who have been here each Sunday afternoon, and our phone volunteers as well. For WDSC, WRPT TV, I'm Greg Grell. Have a great evening.